Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 162. And just a little catch up before we get into that. Some travelers from another dimension came to Earth looking for a guy named Jim Rook, who was a champion that had helped them before in their dimension. It turns out that the place they're from, called Mira, has been taken over by evil wizards, and they need to bring back James Rook to this place to help defeat these wizards. And the reason why he needs to go is because these wizards now have put their eyes on Earth as their next place to conquer. So in the last issue we saw the wizard named Broakin come to Earth, and specifically in Huma, and he was on a mission to capture the most powerful being on Earth and make them bow to his will. And of course, as we know, Swamp Thing is now that most powerful being on the Earth, now that he has control of the Earth elements and also water. And unfortunately, Broakin showed up at the wrong time because Abby Arcane, Swamp Thing's old love, has come back and asked him to kind of be with her again. And in the middle of her conversation, Broakin decided to call Swamp Thing to him, which left Abby in the middle of the swamp by herself while she was high on some of Swamp Thing's tubers. So she started to freak out, but then we cut away to where Swamp Thing had been taken by Broakin, and he has called Swamp Thing to the police station in the middle of Huma, and he is controlling Swamp Thing, and he's using him to take over the police station in the middle of town. And there are people inside the building, but unfortunately, it looks like they are not going to be living further than today. And that is where we left off. So first things first, with issue 162, we see the same black and white art style as the last cover, except this time we see Broakin standing over Swamp Thing, holding out his staff, and Swamp Thing is on his knees on the ground, bound in front of Broakin. And we also see on the cover that this is written by Mark Miller, with art by Phil Hester and Kim DeMolder. And on the first page, we start off inside of the now Swamp Thing covered police station. We see there's a bunch of vines grown inside. The power has been cut, so everybody's using candles for light. And in the first panel, we see Mr. Plastino, who was working on the phones, is now messing around with some of the telephone equipment inside of the police station, trying to get the phones to work. And the narration says, "The irony of the Huma Police Department trying to contact the emergency services fails to amuse anyone trapped inside the building. All they can do is sweat as Mr. Plastino, the telephone engineer, tries to make the phone lines operational again." Then we see the receptionist, Bess, and she is talking on a phone, it looks like, and the narration continues. Receptionist Bess Urquhart dials the hero hotline all stations are issued with, and a calm voice assures her someone will arrive shortly. Briefly, Bess calls her mother and tells her not to worry, no matter what she may hear on the news. Then I guess because everybody else wants to talk to someone as well, they begin to try to use the same phone, which is that hero hotline phone, which I assume is put in for, like, you know, when you got to call Superman or something. So it's not part of the normal phone lines that are down at the moment. So the next person we see try the phone is Brett Harris, and the narration says, "Waiting patiently, Officer Brett Harris wonders how he can possibly explain this situation to his elder half-brother, trying hard not to eavesdrop on Mr. Plastino's whimpering call home. Brett's wife, Beth Louise, calls her mother to say she and the baby are fine. Edward the confessor skips his turn, not knowing anyone close enough to care. Officer Sendak is the last to call home, unable to think of a clever way to begin what might conceivably be the last telephone call of his life. Under the circumstances, it's hardly surprising." Then we see someone else in the department pick up the phone and say, Hillary, sweetheart, you remember I was complaining that nothing exciting ever happened at the station? Well, guess what? Then we turn the page and we see the entire exterior of the building is covered with the vines of Swamp Thing, and he has grown a giant head of himself that is sitting on the top of the building, and we see Broakin doing some magic at the base of the building. And we also see on this page that the name of this issue is Telephone Calls from the Dead. Then we cut to inside the dimension, I guess, where Swamp Thing is being held by Broakin, and we see Swamp Thing is bound by some ethereal ropes, and as Broakin looks down on Swamp Thing, he says, You look ridiculous sitting there, all trussed up like a turkey. I thought elementals were supposed to be dignified. And then Swamp Thing looks up at him and he says, Oh, don't look so surprised. I know all about you and your kind. I'm not the typical brand of moron you usually deal with. I'm really very good at this sort of thing. And then Swamp Thing says, Where am I? And Broken answers, You're trapped in the one place on Earth I could be sure you would have little to no control over the environment, Earl King. That's what they call you here, isn't it? An Earl King. Your spirit has been separated from the life web of the green, locked into my left cerebral cortex, and cut off from its power source. It's tragic to watch. You're helpless without the green, aren't you? Just a big pile of moss and twigs, begging to set fire on. And Swamp Thing says, What are you talking about? Who are you? And Broken answers, I am Broken, High Priestess of Mira, and the servant of the Warlocks. I am here because I want your elemental powers, Earl King. It's really as simple as that. Are you familiar with the Warlocks of Mira? No? Well, it doesn't matter. They'll be here soon enough. They sent me to Earth to prepare for their arrival. My instructions were to neutralize the one creature here who might offer some resistance, namely you. The metahumans won't pose too much of a problem, but elementals have been difficult in the past. And Swamp Thing looks at him and says, I do not care who you are or what forces you represent. You will not succeed. I will find a way to stop you. And Broken replies, Your bold claim would have more potency if there were some reason I should be afraid. But you can't even enter the green again from here. All avenues of escape have been closed. Your plant abilities have been manipulated to form a Wicker Man around this building, a makeshift altar to the elements. When the moon is in position, I will set the pyre ablaze and exorcise your soul from the earth forever, taking your place as my reward. And upon hearing this, Swamp Thing gets very animated, and he starts freaking out, and he says, Broakin, you are mistaken. If you believe my talents and responsibilities can be stolen by a cheap magic, I have learned that such phenomenal power must always be earned. And Broakin looks down on him and says, Bollocks. Then we turn the page and we cut to Abby, still walking around in the swamp, and she's saying, Where are you, Alec? I'm having a really bad time here, you know? Why don't you come back and give me a hand? Are you doing this to punish me? It's not like I'm the one who... Jesus, what have you done to the swamp? And she's saying this because as she's looking around, she's seeing some kind of weird psychedelic version of the trees, and they don't look very healthy. And as she reaches up to touch one of them, she says, Look at the trees. It's like they've slashed their wrists, and they're bleeding to death. And you didn't even care, you son of a bitch. Then she hears a noise behind her, and she turns around to see the rock construct that Swamp Thing has made to help him out in the swamp. But of course, she's still tripping, so she thinks it's actually Alec. And then she says, Oh shit, it's you. Alec? Is that? And then she realizes that it's not him, and she screams out at the rock construct. And then she takes off running away from it, and the narration says, Abby tries to rationalize the situation. This thing isn't going to hurt her, no matter what it says in its rock-slide voice. Eating the tuber is what made her so afraid. It's not a monster. It's just a construct built by Alec, imprinted with all of his human feelings to keep him company as he sits around the swamp. Her heart tells her not to worry, but her brain keeps sending messages to her legs, telling them to run and never look back. Maybe the creature resents the time she spent with Alec, or perhaps it knows about the things she said in Arizona, the horrible, hurtful things she blurted out when they were fighting in the desert. All these thoughts pinball around in her mind. So as Abby is running, she's of course running through water, splashing about, and this is alerting the local wildlife to her presence, some of which who are meat eaters, and also the rock construct Swamp Thing is following behind her. He's not very fast, but he is behind her. And as Abby's running, she's not really thinking about any of the animals or wildlife that might be dangerous. So as she runs, the narration says, "Sensing blood, a group of alligators poke their snouts into the moonlight and slide, one by one, into the warm November waters. There's no way out of this situation now." Then we cut back to inside of the police station, and we see the same guy is talking on the phone, I guess to his wife, and he's saying, "Considering everything that's happened, I'd say we're holding out pretty well, Hillary. The windows and doors are completely sealed off, which means we don't exactly have as much air as we'd like, but we're dealing with the situation like regular troopers, you know? We figured the emergency candles were just raising the temperature and using way too much oxygen, so now we're just burning enough to get by. The station's air conditioning cut off when the power cables snapped and the water supply shut down. Bess reckons there's enough cold cans in the drinking machine to keep us all from dehydrating, at least until help arrives. You remember Bess, right? She was the receptionist we were talking to at the Christmas party, the one who never married and wears too much makeup. They say a crisis like this brings out the worst in people, and Bess has really come out fighting. She won't give up." And under this narration, we see a panel of Bess grabbing the fire axe, I guess, that's on the wall, and kind of standing like she's about to maybe hack some of the vines away. Then one of the people, who I think is Officer Sendak, hears the noise and he says, "What was that? Did anyone else hear that noise? What the hell's going on out there?" But then the receptionist, Bess, comes out from behind a corner, and she's holding the axe, and she says, "Relax, everything's okay. It's just the dogs getting restless downstairs. They're probably as spooked by all this crazy stuff as we are. Poor things. They must be terrified." Then the guy on the phone continues his conversation saying, "I wish you were here, Hillary. I really need someone to hold my hand right now." Then we cut to Officer Harris, whose wife is kind of clinging onto him, and he's saying to her, "It's okay, honey. Hang in there. Everything's going to be fine. Just take another sip of this soda. I personally guarantee you and young Arnie here will feel a whole lot better." And I think the Arnie he's talking about is his unborn child. I think he's just trying to try out another name that might potentially work. And I think he's trying to see if his wife will go for naming his child after Arnold Schwarzenegger. But standing next to them is Mr. Plastino, who is the telephone guy, who also was the guy that was tied up in the box by his wife in the last issue. So he looks at Officer Harris's wife and he says, "She looks terrible, man. So you think she's going to last until help arrives or what?" And Officer Harris gets very angry at this. So he looks up at Mr. Plastino and he snaps back, "Will you shut up and get out of my face? My wife's 7 months pregnant, okay? She feels enough like shit already without some asshole asking stupid questions every 2 minutes." And Mr. Plastino replies, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean anything." And then Bess, the receptionist, comes over to Mr. Plastino and says, "Brett didn't mean anything either, Mr. Plastino. I guess everybody's getting all hot and bothered, cooped up in this place so long. Maybe we should call the hotline again and see what's keeping that superhero they promised us." And then she turns to the officer on the phone and she says, "Would you mind if we make a call?" But the officer doesn't say anything to her. He just begins to wrap up his conversation saying, "Listen, Hillary, I better go. I've been on the phone longer than anybody else, and I think the others want to call the hotline one more time, honey. You know, the department I told you about that can put us in touch with any superhero who carries a beeper." "Who are they sending?" They said they were sending someone with more than 10 years experience dealing with stuff like this. Some guy named Tim Trench. He's supposed to be one of the best in the business." "Uh-huh. Yeah, I never heard of him either." Then we turn the page and we cut back to Abby in the swamp, and she has grabbed a branch and she is waiting for the rock construct swamp thing to finally reach her, and she yells at him, You get lost now, understand? Alec will be back any second, so you better get the hell out of here right this minute." And then she raises the branch like she's going to attack, and she says, "You want this, huh? You want this across your face? One more step, and I swear I'll take your goddamn head right off your shoulders." And then she begins to cry, and she says, "All right, come on, you big shit. You first, huh? You first." But instead of attacking, the rock construct says, "Don't move. Stay where you are, and you won't get hurt." And Abby's kind of confused, and she says, What are you talking about?" And then she looks over her shoulder, and she sees a bunch of alligators about to attack her, and she says, "Oh my God." And just as they lunge for her, the rock construct jumps and he grabs the one that was about to bite her, and then he proceeds to beat the crap out of the alligator. I don't know if he kills it, but he definitely picks it up by the tail and swings it down into the water, and it looks like it's not going to feel too good after that. So now that the alligators have been dealt with, the rock construct is now standing next to Abby, and he looks at her and he says,
"Pardon me if I scared you, Abby. It wasn't my intention. I was just a little concerned for your safety."
And Abby asks, How do you know my name? And the construct replies,
"Your paranoia is just the residual effects of the hallucinogenic tuber, distorting your senses. There's really no need to be afraid. The Earl King has asked me to look after you until he returns from his battle."
And then Abby looks up at him, less scared, and she says, "Huh. Oh, you mean Alec, right? What do you know about him? Have you any idea why he disappeared when we were together earlier?" And the construct replies,
"He's trapped outside the green and fighting for his life against an unknown foe. But don't worry. I'm sure everything will be fine. Let me help you, Abby. Take my hand, and I will show you the safest way out of the swamps."
Then we cut back to the police station, but this time we're on the outside of it, and the narration says, "Outside the Huma police station, everyone waits for the midnight execution with a knot of tension in their bellies. Where are the super people they expect in these situations? Why aren't they dropping through the clouds to stop this before someone really gets hurt?" Then we get a panel of a phone somewhere, and it's just ringing, and no one's picking it up. So I'm assuming this is the second call that the people inside are making to the hero hotline. And for some reason, nobody's answering, but someone's yelling, "The phone! Somebody answer the goddamn phone!" Then we see Broakin outside, and his hand begins to light on fire, and it seems like he's about to torch the building finally. And the narration says, "Standing behind their cars and their old pickup trucks, the friends and neighbors of those inside take 2 or 3 steps back as Broakin the Druid ignites his left hand." Then we cut to inside the police station, and Bess is trying to call the hotline still, and it's just ringing, and Officer Harris is asking, "Who is it? What are they saying, Bess? Why the hell haven't those guys sent someone down to sort this goddamn mess?" Then we get a panel of the people outside, the friends and neighbors, and the narration says, "Everyone takes a sharp collective breath. They know in their hearts that no one is coming. It's all over now, but the screaming." Then we cut back inside to Bess, and I guess she got a hold of someone finally, and she says, "It was the hero hotline. They said Tim Trencher's caught in traffic, and he's going to be at least another hour and a half." Then we turn the page, and we see the building is being engulfed in flames as Broakin the Druid sets it alight. And of course, everybody inside is terrified, and they don't know what to do. And I guess the head officer guy says, "I'm sorry. I can't do this on my own. Please, somebody hold me." Then we see the flames engulfing the floors, and the narration says, "It's the look on their faces that he regrets. The expressions of sheer futility, like dead-eyed cows waiting in line for a bolt in the head and knowing exactly how much it's going to hurt. This is Broakin the Druid's one and only misgiving about the situation. If only he could see them, he thinks. The sound of their crying is never enough." Then we get some panels of all the people inside trying to get out, but they are beginning to burn alive, and the narration continues saying, 16 lives go up in smoke. 16 universes come to an end, as Broakin the Druid takes a deep breath, eager to feel the rush of elemental energy shoot through his body. But there's nothing. No difference at all. So if you remember, all of this was supposed to be for a sacrifice, I guess, to the parliaments who control the elements, and when Swamp Thing burned, they were supposed to give him the powers of Swamp Thing. But that doesn't seem to be happening, and Broakin's confused, and he says,
"The Earl King! What happened? Where is he?"
So I guess while Broakin was concentrating on setting the police station ablaze, he wasn't looking inside his mind where he had Swamp Thing trapped, and Swamp Thing was able to escape, because as we turn the page, we see Swamp Thing swimming through the melt, which is the magma dimension that he kind of travels through, much like the green, except for the stone realm. And as he swims through the magma, his narration says, "This entity who covets my abilities understands my relationship with the green, but his knowledge of the melt appears limited at best. Had his attack occurred 12 months ago, he might have won, but I have since been shown levels beyond the green, realms such as this, where he has no control. There is little time to waste, and so I shift my consciousness outside, even the molten stasis of the melt, and into the cool cyan waters of the blue. The Parliament of Waves taught me how to find this place where I can control the fluids of the earth, but I sense this is merely a fraction of the overall picture. Reaching out, I concentrate my mind upon America, focusing upon this landmass between the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. Selecting a single drop of water, concentrating hard, I make it stand to attention. What comes next is the difficult part." And underneath this last bit of narration, we see some water begin to raise up and dance inside of what looks like a storm drain. And we see the water go through a grate, and it is in fact a storm drain that just happens to be next to Brokey and the Druid. So as the water begins to form, Swamp Thing's narration continues, saying, "These abilities are still new to me. Constructing a body from sewer water is much more complicated than using plant materials. Fashioning my basic skeleton is simple enough, but surrounding it with soaking muscles and fluid arteries requires a disciplined mind and careful attention. The end result, however, is quite remarkable." Then we see a Swamp Thing water construct appear right next to Brokian, and he says to him, "I understand you wish to feel the full extent of my elemental abilities. So be it." And then he raises his hand threateningly, walking towards Brokian. And Brokian is totally taken aback by this. He even kind of leans back, almost like he's going to fall, and he says, "What are you? Ah!" And the water construct Swamp Thing says, "This is a fight you should not have provoked. Your masters will find I am no longer simply the guardian of the green. Now the earth and the water of this planet heed my words and fear my name." And Brokian yells back, "You bastard! I'll kill you! I'll..." And then Brokian can no longer talk, and the water construct Swamp Thing says, "I could freeze the blood in your veins if I wish, suck dry your cranial fluid, or burst a geyser in your frail black heart. But instead, I choose a more subtle attack." Then we see Brokian begins to, mummify and flake away. And the water construct Swamp Thing says, "I give you total dehydration and a message to those you serve. If they dare threaten who I protect." And with that, Swamp Thing smashes the skull of the dried up body of Brokey and the Druid. And then Swamp Thing turns to all the people outside who were crowded around watching the building burn, and he says to them, "The threat is over. You can return to your homes now. The Druid is dead." And then Swamp Thing looks at all the people in the crowd, and in his thoughts he says, "All around me, people are watching. There's no sign of relief on their faces. They don't know if I've saved them, or if one monster has simply been replaced by another." A little girl steps forward, unafraid. And we see a little girl step out of the crowd, and she looks at the Swamp Thing construct, and she says, "Mister?" And then she runs towards the construct, and her father says, "Mindy, come back here. Oh God, somebody get him away from her." And then the water construct Swamp Thing gets on one knee, and as she runs to him, he says, "Don't listen to them. I'm not going to hurt you. Tell me, what were you going to say?" And then the girl stops in front of him and looks at him and says, "I was just going to say, our houses are burning down and we don't have any place else to stay. Look." And then she motions to the rest of the street, which is now on fire because the police building was engulfed, and I guess the fire just spread to the surrounding houses and buildings. So Swamp Thing stands up and he looks at the burning inferno of this street, and his narration says,
"These people have no one to help them, and there's nothing I can do. Timber frames pop and crack as the blaze spreads from home to home. Unless the cloud formation overhead."
And then Swamp Thing looks up at the clouds, and the little girl says, "Mister?" And then Swamp Thing begins to focus, and his body begins to come apart, and the water begins to move upward into the sky. And Swamp Thing's narration says,
"Is it possible? Discarding my body, I let it go in search of something which might prove useful. I pray this works."
And we see all the neighborhood people look up at the sky, and one of them says, "Look at the clouds! Jesus Christ, it's him!" Then we get to see what they're looking at, and it is in fact a cloud in the shape of Swamp Thing's face, and the cloud looks like it's very gray and heavy. And Swamp Thing's narration says,
"A deep grumble fills the sky from end to end, the primal thunder drowning out any other sound on the streets beneath me. My consciousness is stretched across the face of a storm cloud, casting a familiar shadow and haunting each and every magic raindrop." And as the rain begins to fall, the neighborhood people look up and one of them says, "Holy shit!" And then it begins to pour rain down onto the burning areas of the neighborhood, and Swamp Thing's narration continues saying, "The feeling is indescribable. I close my eyes and burst in a million perfumed droplets, all at once across the contours of a burning town, trickling down so many happy faces. No wonder the Druid wanted this so badly. I feel like I'm in heaven."
And I just want to point out, in one of these panels, we get a zoom in on the raindrops themselves, and it looks like there's a little baby Swamp Thing in each of them. And needless to say, of course, the rain is successful at putting out the flames. Then we see one of the onlookers who is kind of standing by an alley as he stares at the smoking rubble of the police station, and someone says to him, "Pardon me, sir." And the guy looks over to see a man in a car, and the guy driving says, "Pardon me, but is this where Miss Bess Urquhart of Huma sent out an emergency distress signal? My people were told the local police station was in some kind of trouble." And the guy on the street looks at the driver and says, "Yeah, this is the place, but it's all over now. You're too late." Then we get a good look at the driver, and it turns out that this is Timothy Trench, the superhero who was supposed to come and help the people inside the building. And he looks at the onlooker and says, "Goddamn traffic. My agent's gonna fry my ass for this. Just you wait and see. There goes another $250 tax-free cash. Shit." Then he reaches into his coat pocket and he pulls out a card and he holds it out to the guy on the street and he says, "Hey, listen, while I'm here, I might as well give you my card, right? Just in case you need any help of the superhero variety." And the guy looks at the card and he says, "Tim Trench? Jesus, what kind of name is that?" Then Tim Trench gets very angry at that and says, "What's so funny about Tim Trench, you son of a bitch? What are you called that's so great?" And the man on the street says, "I've just got a normal name. It might not be anything special, but at least I don't sound like an asshole." Then Tim Trench's car speeds away, and we see the bumper sticker that says, "Support your local superhero." And as the car burns out and we see some smoke from the tires in the distance, we see the man on the street say, "My name's Hillary. Ain't nothing funny about that." So I guess we're supposed to assume that this is the Hillary that the police officer inside the station was talking to earlier. So I guess it was supposed to be kind of like this is his lover or husband. Or I guess this is actually 1996, so it had to be his lover. Then we cut to the swamps and we see Swamp Thing begin to rise in his plant body from the swampy waters. And he begins calling out,
"You can come out now, Abby. I've turned off the rain. Did you know I could do things like that now? Abby?"
But instead of Abby, the stone construct Swamp Thing comes out from behind a tree and he says,
"No, Earl King, not Abby. Beautiful Abby is no longer with us."
And Swamp Thing looks kind of angry and he says,
"What have you done with her? Tell me now."
And the stone construct Swamp Thing answers,
"What have I done? I sat here for hours under a tree, listening to what she had to say and wiping the tears from her cheeks as she spoke. Abby told me her side of a story I've heard many times, how she gave up her whole world just to be with you, and how you turned your back on her just when she needs you the most. When she felt better, I located her car, but before she left, she gave me a message I was instructed to pass on to you. Would you like to hear it?
And Swamp Thing answers,
Yes. Tell me, what did she say?
And the rock construct replies,
She said, you're becoming more of a monster every single day.
And at that, Swamp Thing just turns from the stone construct and he walks into the swamp towards the sunset, and his eyes are shaded so we can't really see them, but you can imagine they are either tearful or very sad. And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.